The burgundy silk blouse hung in my closet like a soldier waiting for battle. 23 years at Meridian Financial, and I still chose my armor carefully for meetings that mattered. The fabric was expensive, a Christmas gift to myself after my first $1 million year, with pearl buttons that caught the morning light streaming through my bedroom window. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I've worn this blouse on exactly 4 occasions in the past decade. My performance review when they promoted me to senior wealth advisor, my mother's funeral, the company's 25th anniversary gala where I received the Client Excellence Award, and now this. A meeting Marcus Sterling's assistant had scheduled with the deliberately vague subject line, Strategic Career Development Discussion. At 62, I'd learned to read corporate euphemisms like ancient Greek. Strategic meant they'd already made their decision. Career development meant mine was about to take a turn I hadn't requested. Discussion meant they'd talk, I'd listen, and pretend we were having a conversation when really they were delivering a verdict. But I dressed for battle anyway, because 23 years in financial services had taught me that dignity was something you wore, not something others granted you. The drive to the office took me past the neighborhoods where half my clients lived. Patricia Wells in the Colonial with the meticulously maintained garden, still there because I'd restructured her portfolio after her husband Harold's heart attack, ensuring she could keep the house they'd shared for 40 years. The Hartwell Group's headquarters, where Richard had built a manufacturing empire with financial advice that prioritized stability over flashy returns. Robert Chambers' original facility, now expanded into a complex of buildings because we'd timed his growth financing perfectly through 3 economic cycles. These weren't just addresses on my route to work. They were victories. Families kept secure, businesses grown thoughtfully, retirements planned and executed flawlessly. Each success story represented months or years of relationship building, late-night crisis calls, and the kind of personal attention that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. Meridian Financial occupied 18 floors of a glass tower. Downtown, all sharp angles and reflective surfaces designed to project confidence and prosperity. I'd been here when the building was new, when the company had 12 employees and dreams bigger than its bank account. Now it housed over 300 staff members, multiple divisions, and enough corporate bureaucracy to choke a Fortune 500 company. My corner office on the 14th floor overlooked the river, a view I'd earned through 2 decades of consistent performance. Client retention rates that never dropped below 89%. Revenue growth that averaged 12% annually, even during recession years. A referral rate that made the marketing department jealous because my clients actually recommended me to their friends and family. But numbers apparently weren't everything. The elevator ride to the 16th floor felt longer than usual. Executive territory, where the carpets were thicker and the art on the walls cost more than most people's annual salaries. I'd been summoned here only 3 times before, twice for recognition, once for a consultation on a major client acquisition. Today felt different. Marcus Sterling's corner office was twice the size of mine, with furniture that screamed, "I make important decisions," and awards that documented his meteoric rise through the company. He'd joined Meridian 5 years ago as a vice president, promoted to senior VP within 18 months, and rumored to be in consideration for the C-suite before his 40th birthday. His assistant, Jennifer Walsh, greeted me with the kind of professional smile that never reached her eyes. She was perhaps 35, always impeccably dressed, and treated her tablet like a life support device she couldn't survive without. Everything about her screamed efficiency and corporate competence. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, standing as I entered the reception area. "Thank you for making time this morning. Marcus is just finishing up a conference call with the board." I nodded and settled into one of the leather chairs that cost more than my first car. Through the glass wall, I could see Marcus pacing behind, his desk gesticulating at someone on his computer screen with the kind of animated confidence that came from never having been truly wrong about anything important. "Can I offer you coffee? Water? We have that sparkling water you mentioned at the company retreat." The fact that Jennifer remembered my beverage preferences from a casual comment made 6 months ago was either impressive attention to detail or unsettling surveillance. In corporate America, the line between the two had become increasingly blurred. "Coffee would be fine," I said. "Black." Jennifer returned with coffee in a porcelain cup embossed with the Meridian logo, served on a matching saucer with a small spoon I wouldn't need. The coffee was excellent. Probably cost more per pound than most people spent on groceries in a week. Marcus finished his call and emerged from his office like a general preparing to address his troops. At 35, he was lean, perfectly groomed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never failed at anything significant. His suit probably cost more than I spent on clothing in a year, and his handshake was firm enough to project authority without crossing into aggression. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing toward his office, "I appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule. I know how dedicated you are to your clients." The conference table in his office could seat 12 people comfortably, with leather chairs that adjusted in 6 different directions and built-in charging stations for tablets and laptops. Marcus took the head seat automatically, with Jennifer positioned to his right like a lieutenant ready to provide tactical support. I chose the seat directly across from him, close enough to maintain eye contact but far enough away to avoid feeling crowded. 23 years of client meetings had taught me the psychology of seating arrangements. "Let's dive right in," Marcus said, opening a folder that Jennifer slid across the table. "We're implementing some exciting changes to our wealth management division, and your experience makes you a crucial part of this transition." The folder contained a single sheet of paper titled Succession Planning Initiative, Phase 1 Implementation. At the top was a professional headshot of Tyler Harrison, a young man who'd joined Meridian 18 months ago with an MBA from a prestigious business school and enough enthusiasm to power a small city. Tyler was everything corporate America. Loved in a new hire, educated, energetic, eager to prove himself, and inexpensive. He asked good questions in meetings, volunteered for extra projects, and had mastered the art of corporate speak that made everything sound innovative and strategic. He also thought compound interest was something you could negotiate with banks, and had once asked me if the stock market closed on weekends. "Tyler represents the future of client relations at Meridian," Marcus continued, his tone suggesting he was sharing profound wisdom rather than obvious corporate cost-cutting. "He brings fresh perspectives, cutting-edge training, and the kind of energy our evolving client base expects." Jennifer consulted her tablet, reading from prepared notes. "The transition plan involves a structured mentorship program where you'll transfer your client relationships to Tyler over the next 6 months. He'll shadow your meetings, learn your processes, and gradually assume primary responsibility for account management." I opened my briefcase and retrieved my client performance summary, a document I'd prepared that morning because I'd suspected this conversation was coming. 43 active accounts representing $47 million in assets under management. Average client tenure of 8 years. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Retention rate of 89% over the past 5 years. Revenue growth that had contributed over $3.2 million to the company's bottom line during that same period. "My clients specifically requested to work with me," I said, placing the summary on the table between us. "The Hartwell Group's contract includes a clause requiring my personal oversight of their account. Patricia Wells threatened to withdraw her portfolio when we suggested having a junior advisor handle routine transactions." Marcus glanced at the document but didn't pick it up, as if the numbers I'd presented were interesting but ultimately irrelevant to the decision that had already been made. "Eleanor," he said, his voice taking on the patronizing tone that men his age used when they wanted to sound wise and paternal. "Client relationships evolve. People adapt to change when it's presented properly and supported with excellent service. Jennifer leaned forward, consulting her tablet again. Our research shows that clients initially prefer familiar advisors, but satisfaction rates remain consistent when transitions are managed professionally. Tyler has received extensive training in relationship management and client communication. Training, I repeated, letting the word sit in the air like an objection that didn't need further explanation. Comprehensive training, Marcus emphasized. 6 months of intensive preparation, including shadowing our most successful advisors, completing advanced certification programs, and participating in client simulation exercises. I thought about Patricia Wells calling me at 9:30 on a Sunday evening when Harold had his second heart attack, needing immediate access to their emergency fund and reassurance that their financial security wouldn't disappear along with her husband's income. I thought about Robert Chambers driving to my office at midnight during the 2008 financial crisis, needing someone to explain how the market collapse would affect his business expansion plans. Those weren't situations you could prepare for in simulation exercises. They required judgment that came from experience, relationships that had been tested through multiple crises, and trust that had been earned through years of putting client needs ahead of corporate convenience. Tyler is certainly capable, I said diplomatically. But these relationships have been built over years, sometimes decades. My clients trust my judgment because I've guided them through multiple market cycles, helped them navigate personal financial crises, and consistently prioritized their long-term security over short-term gains. Marcus leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head in a gesture that was probably meant to project thoughtful consideration, but instead suggested barely contained impatience. Eleanor, I appreciate your dedication, and I don't want to minimize the relationships you've built. But the reality is that client relationships belong to Meridian, not to individual advisors. Our clients are investing in the firm's expertise and resources, not in personal connections that can't be scaled or replicated. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, acrid and impossible to ignore. Client relationships belong to Meridian, not to the advisor who had earned trust through decades of consistent service, not to the professional who had guided families through their most important financial decisions, but to the corporate entity that saw those relationships as transferable assets in a spreadsheet. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his tone shifting from paternal to professional, the industry is evolving rapidly. Our clients' expectations are changing. They want advisors who understand digital platforms, who can communicate through multiple channels, who bring fresh energy and innovative approaches to wealth management. Fresh energy. At my age, that was corporate code for, you're too old to matter anymore. Innovative approaches meant, we want someone cheaper who won't question our efficiency initiatives. Jennifer opened another folder and slid a document across the table. This outlines the timeline for the transition. Tyler has already been briefed on your major accounts and will begin shadowing your client meetings next week. We've scheduled introduction sessions with your top 5 clients for the following week, without asking me, without consulting the clients who had specifically chosen to work with me, who had built their financial strategies around my expertise and guidance. They had simply decided that relationships I'd spent years cultivating could be transferred. Through a series of meetings and a corporate introduction process, I looked at both of them, really looked. Marcus, with his expensive suit and untested confidence, worried about metrics and growth targets and impressing board members who cared more about quarterly cost savings than client satisfaction. Jennifer with her digital efficiency tools, trying to manage human relationships through software solutions and corporate processes. They saw my clients as account numbers, asset values, and revenue streams that could be reassigned through administrative procedures. I saw them as human beings who had trusted me with their financial security, their retirement dreams, their children's education funds, their family legacies. I understand the business rationale, I said finally, my voice calm and professional, despite the anger building in my chest. When would you like this transition to begin? Immediately, Jennifer said, consulting her tablet one more time. Tyler is eager to get started, and our timeline requires quick implementation to ensure seamless service delivery. Seamless service delivery. Corporate speak for, "We want to complete this cost-cutting measure before anyone has time to object," or before clients realize what's happening. I nodded slowly, as if their logic made perfect sense, as if 23 years of relationship building could be transferred through a training program and a series of introduction meetings. "I'll need to review my calendar and coordinate with my clients," I said. "Some of them have scheduled meetings and ongoing projects that will require careful handling." "Of course," Marcus said, his smile suggesting he believed the conversation had gone exactly as planned. "We appreciate your professionalism and cooperation during this transition. This is an opportunity for you to focus on strategic development and mentorship, while Tyler handles the day-to-day client management responsibilities." Strategic development. Another euphemism. In 6 months, after Tyler had been introduced to all my clients and the transition was deemed successful, I would discover that my role in strategic development was no longer necessary. My position would be eliminated in the name of organizational efficiency, and I would be offered a generous severance package in exchange for a non-compete agreement and a promise not to discuss the transition process with former clients. Seen this playbook before. Experienced employees gradually shifted to reduced responsibilities, then eliminated entirely once their knowledge had been transferred to cheaper replacements. It was efficient, cost-effective, and perfectly legal. It was also stupid. But I smiled and nodded and gathered my papers, because 23 years in corporate America had taught me that arguing with decisions that had already been made was a waste of energy that could be better spent on more productive activities. "Thank you for this opportunity," I said, standing and extending my hand for the ritual farewell handshake. "I look forward to working with Tyler and ensuring our clients receive the excellent service they deserve." Marcus's handshake was firm and confident, the grip of someone who believed he had successfully managed a difficult conversation. Jennifer smiled and made a note on her tablet, probably recording that the meeting had concluded satisfactorily, and the transition could proceed as planned. I walked out of that conference room with my dignity intact and my resignation already drafted in my mind. The elevator ride back to my office gave me time to process what had just occurred. They hadn't fired me. That would have been honest. Instead, they had created an elaborate fiction about mentorship and strategic development, when the reality was simple. I was too expensive, too experienced, and too independent for their vision of corporate efficiency. Tyler was waiting near my office when I returned, notebook in hand and eager expressions suggesting he genuinely believed this transition would be a learning experience rather than a replacement process. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, straightening his tie with nervous energy, "I'm really excited about this opportunity. I've reviewed your client files, and I'm impressed by the long-term relationships you've built. I hope I can learn from your experience, while bringing some fresh approaches to account management." Looking at him, I felt a mixture of sympathy and irritation. Tyler wasn't malicious. He was simply young, ambitious, and naive about the corporate machinery that was using him to eliminate a more expensive employee. In 2 years, when he had gained experience and started commanding a higher salary, they would probably replace him with another eager MBA who cost less and asked fewer questions. "I'm sure you'll do well," I said diplomatically. Client relationships in wealth management require patience, attention to detail, and a genuine commitment to putting client needs first. Those skills develop over time through experience with different types of people and financial situations. Tyler nodded eagerly, scribbling notes as if I were sharing trade secrets rather than basic professional advice. "I've been studying your approach to portfolio management," he said, consulting his notebook. "Your risk assessment methodology is more conservative than what we learned in business school, but your client retention rates suggest it's effective. I'm hoping to understand the psychological aspects of client relationship management. The psychological aspects of client relationship management. He was trying to reduce decades of relationship building to academic concepts that could be learned from textbooks and applied through structured processes. Psychology is important, I agreed, but it's not something you can study in isolation. Every client has different needs, different fears, different goals. Understanding those requires time, attention, and genuine interest in their success rather than just their account value. Absolutely, Tyler said, making more notes. I'm particularly interested in your approach to crisis management. Your file notes indicate that you've helped several clients navigate major financial challenges. How do you maintain client confidence during market downturns or personal financial crises? How do you maintain client confidence? By answering your phone at midnight when they're panicked about market volatility. By driving to their offices on weekends when they need to make urgent financial decisions. By remembering their grandchildren's names, their health concerns, their business challenges, and their retirement dreams. By caring about their financial security more than your own commission structure or corporate performance metrics. Experience, I said simply. Client confidence comes from consistently demonstrating that their financial well-being is your primary concern. That trust develops over time through multiple interactions, successful outcomes, and honest communication during difficult situations. Tyler nodded and wrote, "Experience, client confidence," in his notebook, as if he could acquire 23 years of relationship building through dedicated note-taking. "I'd like to observe some of your client meetings," he said. "I think seeing your interaction style would help me understand the practical application of relationship management theories." Relationship management theories. He was still trying to turn human connections into academic frameworks that could be studied and replicated through structured learning. "We'll start with Patricia Wells tomorrow morning," I said. "She's been my client for 15 years, and her account represents the kind of long-term relationship that requires careful attention to both financial performance and personal circumstances." "Perfect," Tyler said, making another note. "I've reviewed her file. Widow, moderate risk tolerance, focused on income generation and capital preservation. Her portfolio is weighted heavily toward dividend-paying stocks and municipal bonds." He had memorized her financial profile but knew nothing about Patricia as a person. He didn't know that she called me every December to discuss year-end charitable giving because Harold had believed in supporting local organizations. He didn't know that she worried about being a burden to her daughter and was secretly proud of maintaining her financial independence. He didn't know that she still wore her wedding ring and kept Harold's picture on her kitchen table, or that financial decisions felt overwhelming because Harold had handled most of their investment planning. "Patricia is more than her risk tolerance profile," I said gently. "She's a woman who lost her husband 2 years ago and is still adjusting to making major financial decisions independently. She values consistency, clear communication, and advisors who remember that her money represents security and independence, not just investment performance." Tyler wrote, "Personal circumstances important" in his notebook, missing the larger point that Patricia Wells wasn't a case study in widow financial planning. She was a human being who needed an advisor who understood her situation and cared about her success. That afternoon, I sat in my office and did what I'd never done before. I began documenting everything that couldn't be transferred through corporate training programs, client personalities, communication preferences, family situations, business challenges, health concerns, retirement dreams, financial fears. The human details that turned account management into relationship building. The personal knowledge that created trust and loyalty that couldn't be replicated through efficiency initiatives. Patricia Wells preferred morning meetings because she was sharper earlier in the day, but always needed time to ask questions about market conditions and economic trends. She liked printed reports she could review at home, and always brought a legal pad to take notes in her careful handwriting. Robert Chambers was direct and impatient with small talk, but would spend an hour discussing his business expansion plans if you asked the right questions. He made decisions quickly once he trusted your judgment but needed detailed explanations of how financial strategies would affect his manufacturing operations. The Hartwell Group required formal presentations, with detailed analysis. But Richard Hartwell would make his real decisions during informal conversations after the official meeting ended. He valued advisors who understood the difference between theoretical investment strategies and practical business applications. Margaret Chen from Chen Holdings was methodical and analytical, preferring data-driven recommendations supported by comprehensive research. She asked tough questions and expected thorough answers. But once she trusted your expertise, she became one of the most loyal clients you could have. David Rodriguez from Southwest Property Group needed advisors who understood real estate markets and could coordinate investment strategies with his property development timeline. He appreciated proactive communication about market conditions that might affect his business and valued advisors who thought strategically about the intersection of personal wealth and business finance. These weren't details that appeared in corporate client files or risk assessment profiles. They were insights that developed through years of personal interaction, successful collaboration, and the kind of attention that came from genuinely caring about client success rather than just account performance. I spent 3 hours documenting these insights, creating a record of relationship knowledge that Tyler would never have access to because it couldn't be transferred through training programs or client file reviews. Then I opened my personal contact database and began making copies of information that belonged to me, not to Meridian Financial home phone numbers that clients had given me for emergency use. Personal cell phones for after-hours consultation, direct office lines that bypassed corporate switchboards, email addresses that clients preferred for sensitive communications. Most importantly, I copied the personal notes and contact history that documented why these relationships had developed into long-term partnerships, the crisis calls, the family celebrations, the business milestones, the personal conversations that had created trust and loyalty over years of consistent service. This information wasn't proprietary to Meridian. It was the result of personal investment in client relationships, earned through attention and caring that extended beyond corporate requirements. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had created a comprehensive record of client relationship knowledge that no training program could replicate and no succession planning initiative could transfer. Then I went home, poured a glass of wine, and began making phone calls. The first call was to Patricia Wells. I reached her just as she was finishing dinner, the perfect time for a conversation that wouldn't feel rushed or formal. "Eleanor," she said, warmth filling her voice in a way that reminded me why I'd chosen wealth management as a career. "How lovely to hear from you. I hope you're not calling with bad news about the market." "Nothing like that," I assured her. "I wanted to let you know personally that Meridian is implementing some changes to how client accounts are managed. You'll be hearing from a new advisor named Tyler Harrison in the next few days." The silence on the other end lasted long enough for me to hear her kitchen timer going off in the background. "I'm sorry. Did you say they're replacing you?" Her voice had shifted from warm greeting to the edge I'd heard her use when contractors tried to overcharge her for home repairs. "They're calling it a succession planning initiative," I said, using their corporate language because it felt safer than explaining the reality of cost-cutting measures disguised as strategic development. "Eleanor, honey, I don't want succession planning. I want you. You've been managing my finances since Harold died. You restructured everything so I could keep the house and maintain my independence. Some young man fresh out of college doesn't know me from a quarterly report." Patricia's voice carried the firmness that came from 73 years of life experience and the confidence that came from working with an advisor who had consistently put her needs first. "I understand your concerns," I said carefully, "but these decisions are made at the corporate level. Tyler is very capable, and he'll have access to all your account information and investment history. But he won't know about Harold's charitable commitments, or why I prefer municipal bonds over corporate debt, Or that I need my portfolio structured so I can help my daughter if her husband's business runs into trouble again. Patricia was right, of course. Tyler would inherit her account files and investment profiles, but he wouldn't understand the personal context that shaped her financial decisions. He wouldn't know that her seemingly conservative investment approach was actually a carefully planned strategy to balance income generation with family security and charitable giving. I'm sure Tyler will learn about your preferences as you work together, I said. Though we both knew that learning client preferences through trial and error was different from understanding client needs through years of personal relationship building. Maybe not at Meridian, Patricia said, and I could hear the wheels turning in her voice. Eleanor, you've been more than my financial advisor. You've been my guide through some of the most difficult decisions I've had to make since Harold passed. If you're not managing my account, then maybe I need to think about whether Meridian is the right firm for my needs. After we hung up, I sat with my wine glass and considered the implications of Patricia's response. She wasn't just expressing dissatisfaction with corporate policy. She was questioning whether the firm that had decided to replace her trusted advisor was the right place for her financial future. The second call was to Robert Chambers. I reached him in his office where he typically stayed late reviewing production reports and planning the next day's operations. Eleanor, his gravelly voice filled my earpiece, please tell me you're calling with good news about our expansion. Financing. The financing is proceeding on schedule, I assured him. But I'm calling about a different matter. Meridian is restructuring how client accounts are managed, and you'll be hearing from a new advisor named Tyler Harrison. Hold on, Robert said, and I could hear him closing a door and settling into his chair. Are you telling me they're replacing you? They're calling it succession planning, I said, repeating the corporate euphemism that was becoming easier to use as distance from the morning's meeting. I don't care what they're calling it, Robert said bluntly. Eleanor, you drove to my plant at 2 a.m. during the financial crisis to help me figure out whether we could meet payroll. You know my business. You understand my industry, and you've never given me advice that put your commission ahead of my company's needs. Some kid with an MBA doesn't know the difference between my company and the spreadsheet where we're listed as an account number. Robert had built his manufacturing business through practical decision-making and direct communication. Corporate polish made him suspicious, and he had no patience for efficiency initiatives that prioritized cost-cutting over relationship continuity. Tyler has been thoroughly trained in wealth management and business finance, I said, because loyalty to Meridian still felt like a professional obligation, even when they'd made it clear that my loyalty had an expiration date. Trained by who? Other people who learned about business from textbooks instead of building something with their own hands? Eleanor, I don't need an advisor who's been trained in wealth management theory. I need someone who understands that my money represents 40 years of 12-hour days and weekend work. And who cares more about my success than their quarterly performance metrics? Robert's frustration was palpable, and I understood it completely. He had chosen to work with me because I understood the connection between his business success and his personal financial security. That understanding had developed through years of collaboration, crisis management, and the kind of attention that came from genuinely caring about his company's growth, rather than just his account value. I hear Patterson and Associates is expanding their wealth management division, Robert said casually, though nothing about Robert Chambers was ever casual. Regional firm, good reputation, focused on relationship-based service rather than corporate efficiency initiatives. Might be worth a conversation. Patterson and Associates. I knew the name from industry publications and regional business news. Sandra Patterson had built a solid reputation for client-focused financial services, and they'd tried to recruit me about 5 years ago. I'd remained loyal to Meridian at the time, believing that corporate growth and technological advancement would ultimately benefit both advisors and clients. I'd been wrong about that. Thanks for the information, Robert, I said carefully. Eleanor, you've made me more money and helped my business grow more in 8 years than any advisor has a right to. If you think I'm going to trust that legacy to someone who can't pronounce my company name correctly and doesn't know the difference between manufacturing and consulting, then you don't understand the relationship we've built. The third call was to Margaret Chen. I reached her at home, where she typically spent evenings reviewing financial reports and planning her next day's activities with the methodical precision that had made Chen Holdings one of the region's most successful investment firms. "Eleanor," she said, "I hope you're calling to discuss our quarterly review meeting next week. I have some questions about our international equity allocation." "Actually, I'm calling about a change in how Meridian is structuring client relationships," I said, launching into an explanation that was becoming more practiced with each conversation. Margaret listened without interrupting, a habit that had served her well in business negotiations and made her an ideal client for advisors who preferred thoughtful discussion over small talk and relationship building through shared activities. "So they're replacing experienced advisors with cheaper alternatives and calling it succession planning," she said when I finished. "That's an interesting business strategy for a firm that claims to prioritize client relationships." Margaret's analytical mind had immediately identified the reality behind corporate euphemisms, just as I'd expected. She didn't need explanations about training programs or mentorship initiatives. She understood that experienced professionals were being eliminated for cost reduction purposes. "Tyler Harrison," she continued, "I assume he has an MBA from a prestigious school, minimal real-world experience, and enthusiasm that's supposed to compensate for his lack of practical knowledge about client relationship management." "Tyler is very bright and eager to learn," I said diplomatically. "I'm sure he is. But Eleanor, I didn't choose Meridian because of their training programs or corporate efficiency initiatives. I chose them because you understood my business, provided strategic advice that enhanced my company's financial performance, and demonstrated the kind of professional judgment that comes from experience rather than academic preparation." Margaret paused, and I could hear papers rustling as she consulted her notes. "I've been considering diversifying my advisory relationships anyway," she said. "Chen Holdings has grown to the point where we might benefit from working with multiple firms that specialize in different aspects of wealth management. This succession planning initiative might be an excellent opportunity to explore alternatives." By the time I finished the fourth call with David Rodriguez, a pattern had emerged. My clients weren't just disappointed about the advisor change. They were questioning whether Meridian understood their needs and priorities. David had been particularly direct. "Eleanor, if Meridian thinks client relationships are corporate assets that can be transferred through training programs, then they don't understand the first thing about professional services. I'll give this Tyler kid a chance, but if he doesn't understand real estate development and property investment timing, I'll find an advisor who does." Each conversation reinforced what I'd suspected during the meeting with Marcus Sterling. Meridian's succession planning initiative was based on the assumption that client relationships could be transferred through administrative processes and that experienced advisors were interchangeable with cheaper alternatives who had been properly trained. They were about to discover why that assumption was wrong. The next morning, Tyler arrived at my office 30 minutes early, dressed in a new suit and carrying a leather portfolio that still had price tags attached. His enthusiasm was genuine, and I felt genuinely sorry for him because he had no idea that he was being used to eliminate an experienced professional rather than learn from her expertise. "Good morning, Mrs. Morrison," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I'm really looking forward to our meeting with Patricia Wells this morning. I've prepared some questions about her investment objectives and risk management preferences." Tyler opened his portfolio and consulted a typed list of questions that looked like they'd been copied from a client relationship management textbook. He'd prepared for this meeting the way a student prepares for an exam, memorizing information and formulating questions that would demonstrate his knowledge rather than discover client needs. "Tyler," I said gently, "client meetings aren't tests where you demonstrate what you know. They're conversations where you discover what clients need and how you can help them achieve their financial goals. Patricia Wells doesn't need to be impressed by your knowledge. She needs to trust your judgment and feel confident that you understand her situation. Tyler made a note in his portfolio. Focus on client needs rather than advisor knowledge. We drove to Patricia's house in separate cars, though Tyler had offered to ride together so we could discuss strategy for the meeting. I preferred to maintain independence, particularly since this meeting would probably be one of the last times I'd see Patricia as her advisor. Patricia lived in a colonial-style house with a meticulously maintained garden that reflected her attention to detail and appreciation for long-term planning. She met us at the front door wearing a cardigan that Harold had given her for their 40th anniversary, and a smile that was warm but cautious. "Eleanor," she said, embracing me with the familiarity of someone who had become more than a professional advisor over 15 years of working together. "And you must be Tyler." Tyler stepped forward with his prepared introduction, handshake ready and business card available for presentation. "Mrs. Wells, I'm Tyler Harrison. I'm excited about the opportunity to work with you and learn about your investment objectives and financial planning needs." Patricia shook his hand politely, but I could see her evaluating him with the shrewd judgment that had helped her navigate 67 years of life experience. Tyler looked exactly like what he was, a young professional who had been thoroughly trained in corporate procedures, but had never helped anyone make a major financial decision. Patricia's living room reflected her personality. Comfortable furniture arranged for conversation, family photos that documented decades of marriage and child-rearing, and financial documents organized in neat stacks that suggested methodical preparation for our meeting. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.